In a traditional sense, playing in the pocket came more from the R&B influence, where drummers and bass players would play toward the back of the beat to create this nice feel, and that became known as in the pocket. The pocket, the pocket, the pocket, the pocket, the pocket, the pocket. Pocket in the pocket.
The pocket, the pocket, pocket.
In the pocket, the pocket.
The pocket, known as in the pocket.
What is going on, my fellow and beautiful drum nerds? You are listening to The Pocket, the show where we talk about music, drums, and life. Thank you so much for being here today. We've got a good show. We've got an interesting show. But before we get into it, be sure to check out my free ebook, The Rudiment Rhythm Tree, and that's at justinthomas.net. And the inspiration of this book was basically, when I was growing up, it was always, here's a paradiddle. Play it as fast as you can, and I'm not really even going to tell you what it sounds like on the drum set. How many of you had that experience? Well, this is a system I created for myself to develop faster hands, better coordination, and a deeper understanding of the 7 essential rudiments, and more importantly, how you can use them around the kit. And I'll just leave it at that. Check out the book. It's free. It's at my website, justinthomas.net. And that's it. Let's get into the episode. We've got a good episode. Today, I have my teacher and mentor on. He's a professional drummer and educator from Baltimore, Maryland. His name is Grant Menefee. And if you don't know who Grant Menefee is, well, let's just say he's taught some of the best drummers in the world. And he lives like less than an hour away from my house. So how I met Grant was back in the day when I made the decision, hey, I want to be a professional drummer. I thought the best way to kind of kick off the journey would be to fly to Folsom, California to meet Mike Johnston at one of his drum camps. By the way, if you've never been to a Mike Johnston drum camp, do yourself a favor. They are so much fun. I had a blast. And I got to talk to Mike about how to formulate and create a drumming career. And he gave me tons of advice and ideas. One of the things he told me was that I should find a teacher so that I could take my drumming to the next level. So me living on the East Coast, Mike was like, well, I'm going to hook you up with my friend. Have you heard of him? His name is Matt Halpern. I was like, okay, awesome. If you don't know who Matt Halpern is, he's a drummer for a little band called Periphery. You should probably check them out. He also likes wearing deep V-neck shirts. He's a phenomenal person and drummer, and we arranged a Skype call. And Matt was like, you know, if you're looking for a teacher, look no further than Grant Menefee. He taught me and a slew of other big-name professional drummers. So I reached out to Grant, studied with him for about a year and some change. He is my first private instructor, and I consider him a mentor. He's been extremely helpful to my playing, and that's why I'm excited about today's episode. Now, I did the interview a few months ago, but I wanted to present it in a way a little bit different than you're used to hearing probably. I took myself out of the interview and added music and effects, and it's basically just Grant spitting that knowledge. So, in the first part of the interview, Grant talks about his background growing up in Baltimore, Maryland. For those of you thinking about attending the Berklee College of Music, he gets into a little bit of his time there. And for those of you who have that little voice in your head, or maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's a family member or friend telling you, "Ah, man, drums is a living. You can't do that, man." Well, my friends, Grant offers up some great advice, a great way to look at that sort of negative nonsense. And that's coming up in the first part of the interview. I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get into it. Here is Grant Menefee.
It's bad luck to rename a boat unless you say a prayer to Poseidon. I've always enjoyed fishing as a kid. I have a 21-foot chaparral that I just bought last month. It did have a name from the previous owner, but we're going to rename it. I don't think as human beings we're not designed. We're not wired to do the same thing over and over again. I wouldn't want to do that your whole life. Things like family and relationships, that's all important. and a chance to just every once in a while do something different that you like. Then when you get back to the drumming and, you're fired up and ready to go.
Hi, I'm Grant Menefee.
I'm a music instructor. My preferred title is Grant.
And I've taught some of the best drummers in the world.
I'm from the Baltimore area, a little town called Arbutus. Just a working class community, great place to grow up, good schools. It was a nice place. My parents were great. My mom, she had no musical background, very little. She grew up on a farm here in Maryland, and when we had guys over playing with the bands, she always had sweet iced tea and anything you needed. On my father's end, he was a very good athlete. He was very intelligent, but he grew up fairly poor. His dad died when he was 2 years old. By the time he got out of World War II, he worked hard, but he enjoyed life and took care of us. I think he himself would have liked to play drums. I had a pair of drumsticks and a cheap drum set, and by the time I got to junior high school, did some talent shows, and I was like, I like this. This is fun. Whether I wanted to be an educator or be a performer full-time, I was always preparing for both. It wasn't like I had to have a backup, but I literally did prep for both at Berklee. It's such an intense environment. You're meeting people left and right. You're being educated by really, really good professors. At the same time, a lot of what you learn is going to be from your fellow students. We learn so much from each other. You have people from all over the world. They're bringing their experiences with them. So, yeah, man, 50% of what I learned was from these guys that I went to school with. I think after I graduated, I decided, okay, I'm giving it 5 years. If I think that this is really working for me, if I'm making enough money, if I'm successful enough at it, and I'm making a difference, I'm going to keep going. I was working so much, 3-4 gigs a week, 4.5 days of good, solid teaching. There were some long days. I really enjoyed the teaching. I was good at it. I was getting good results. Wow, I think I can do this. I never looked back. I just kept doing it. Early on, oh my gosh, yeah, you can't do that. Nobody makes any money doing that. Well, thanks for your advice. Which is fine. There's a lot of careers I probably don't understand either. Try to explain to someone who really is not familiar with the music business how you make a living doing it, because they just can't get their head around it. Say, okay, well, thanks for your advice, and then just move right on.
There's a lot of careers that I probably don't understand either. And I can't believe I've never thought about drums this way. Whether it's the voice inside of my head or maybe a loved one going, drums as a living? You can't do that. But how can I expect that person to understand what it is I'm doing? I don't understand the work of a dentist. Nothing against you dentists out there, please, and thank you for taking care of my teeth. Now, the next part of the interview is pretty fascinating. Because, you see, the thing about Grant is he's got tons of famous students. Now, I realize you don't have to have a bunch of famous students to be considered a good educator. But you got to admit, it is an indicator of a good teacher. Which is why I think this next part of the interview is pretty fascinating.
Matt Halpern does a lot of teaching.
Matt Halpern plays for the progressive rock band Periphery.
As a matter of fact, Matt is coming into my studio in a couple of days to give a lesson to my son, Jon, who plays drums also. I taught Matt Halpern, and Matt and I are very good friends. I have a lot of respect for him. Matt's work ethic is off the charts. I mean, just works his butt off. I'm friends with his family. They're fantastic people. Matt's uncle is my eye doctor. And this was before Matt really hit it. And he goes, I think Matt's going to have to do something different. I don't know about this whole drumming thing. And I said, well, okay, you'll see. You'll see. He's such a great drummer.
Stop. Hold it. Breathe. Now.
I taught Mike Reid, who is now touring with Janet Jackson. He's played with Rihanna, Demi Levato. By the way, Modern Drummer needs to do an article on him, and they haven't done it yet. Andy Stack. Andy is with a band called Y Oak. He was just in the latest Modern Drummer issue, so he's finally getting his due. Evan Taubenfeld. He was one of my early success stories. By the time he was 19, was touring with Avril Lavigne. Nate Morton was one of my early students, actually. Now is the drummer on The Voice show. You know, you see him on TV constantly. At one point, one of my students came in. He had a Modern Drummer. He said, hey, this guy in this article said you taught him. Oh, my gosh. And I looked at it and I said, oh, my gosh, Jon Theodore. Haven't heard from him in 5 years or so. Of course, his two most famous bands are Mars Volta, and then he's with Queens of the Stoneage now. My attitude to the students is that when they're here as a student with me, or even when they're finished, I'm here for you, you're my student, and I'm your biggest fan.
Pro tip from one of the biggest educators in the biz today. And speaking of pro tips, in this next segment, we're going to get into tons of little pro tips to help you on your drumming journey. And we'll talk about why do so many pro drummers come out of Baltimore? Why do so many big drummers come out of Baltimore?
There was an area outside of Pittsburgh back in the 70s and 80s. There must have been like some coach that was really good, and he churned out all these great quarterbacks in football history. What happens is it kind of snowballs. It's not all of our doing. A lot of it is the students. They start to say, okay, well, if that guy can do it, I can do it. So I'll just go to him because Grant was successful with him. Maybe he can do that for me. But realistically, a lot of it is what they do. So you're just kind of creating this environment of success, and I'm not going to give myself all the credit for that. I just think it's the right environment right now. Prior to my influence, the two main guys that came out of here that I know there's more, but Dennis Chambers, who's still very active. Obviously, he's a huge contribution to the drumming world. And the other one would be Chick Webb. Chick Webb was arguably the first modern drummer back in the 1920s. He was a game changer as far as the approach to playing drums. Chick is buried right down the road here. If there weren't for Chick Webb, you wouldn't have had Gene Krupa. You wouldn't have had so many other guys, because they all learned from him early on. to be an educator. I wouldn't do it unless your heart's in it. When you are an educator, you've got to put yourself second. While I'm with students, I'm dealing with their issues and their playing, not mine. I can bring my experience to it, but when I'm with them, I'm working on what their goals are, not mine. So you better have that in your head. Oh man, fail and pick yourself up and learn from it. Yeah, you gotta fail. That's life, That's life, The better you get as a drummer, if your priorities are right, timekeeping is going to be your most important thing. Whether the tune needs to be played back in the pocket, or whether you want to be dead right on center, or you want to create some intensity playing on top of the beat. You had mentioned playing to recordings, and I think that should be a huge amount of your practice, because in the end, when the rubber hits the road, that's what you need to be able to do. But as you play with these recordings, you're going to find, oh man, I don't have enough hand speed, or I'm tensing up, or I'm rushing, or my foot is not that good, or I can't play certain figures on my foot. Then you have to ask yourself, what do I need to do to improve those things? So you got to break your practice down in those areas for what your goals are. I think you have to have some natural born talent. If you don't, you're going to have to work that much harder to fulfill your goals. But work ethic is probably the most important thing, without a doubt. Work ethic, most important thing, without a doubt.
With you forever.
When you first start out, there are times where you'll practice constantly. There might be 5 years in your life, or maybe even more, that you really don't do anything else. Nothing. You play drums, you gig, you practice. So there are periods where you literally don't have a balanced life. So why? I wouldn't want to do that your whole life. It's bad luck to rename a boat unless you say a prayer to Poseidon. I have a 21-foot chaparral, so I've said my prayers to Poseidon. We're going to rename it. My son John said, well, what about a 3-hour tour? And I said, yes. Yes.
Well, there you have it, everyone. Grant Menefee. What'd you think? Pretty impressive, right? The same guy that taught Jon Theodore is my teacher. And he could be your teacher, too. Especially if you're in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area. Hit him up, grantmenefee.com. Also, let me know what you think of this sort of format. Do you like it? Is it weird? I don't know. I don't really hear too much of it coming out of the drumming community. It's more of like an NPR type of thing. But I'd love to get your feedback on it. Email me, justin@justinthomas.net. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, by Justin Thomas. I'm also on Twitter, by_Justin Thomas. I guess it was taken. And the website is justinthomas.net. Our theme music is by R. David R. He's got an awesome YouTube channel, tons of drum hacks, and drilling of $500 cymbals. Very entertaining. Also, the music in today's montagey thing was by my brother. He goes by Garcia the Editor on SoundCloud. Be sure to check him out and support. And finally, be sure to leave us a rating and review on iTunes. I'm really not sure how it works at this point, but I hear it will help me out. Thank you so much, and until the next episode, later!